All right, so we're going to go ahead and go over the purchase contract here on how to go ahead and write the purchase contract using zip forms, and maybe a couple strategies that'll help you get your deal through. Okay, so on zip forms, hopefully you know how to get here, and if you do, great. If you don't, then check with the program administrator, or check with me, or check with the girl up front, or something like that. We'll be helping you get through there. So now that you're on zip forms, okay, the first page, attention buyer, this is just a notice to them to let them know exactly what they're getting into. It's a pretty good idea to go ahead and have them initial some of these little spots here so that they can't come back and say later, hey, we didn't know about such and such. Okay, so the first section, we're going to go ahead and say, we click on the first section, we just say the buyer's name, which is in this case, we'll just say Joe Blow, right? And now the seller, we'll say is Sally Smith, right? And then it'll say if you don't know who the owner is, or it's an REO or something like that, you can always click this little section here that says, or as identified in section 9C. This is a section at the very end of the contract where they have to put their name down themselves. Premises address. Okay, so on this, it's very simple. Just go ahead and double click in here, type in their address. Okay, so in this case, we'll just say 123 Main Street, right? Main Street. And then the assessor's number, there's a 5-digit parcel number there. So go ahead and just say 33333, 333, and maybe if it's a B or something like that, right? Then the city, of course, just type in the city, county, and the zip code, okay? Then type in the legal description. You should be able to obtain that from the multiple listing service or from CRS records. Either way is fine. Then type in the purchase property price. Okay, so in this case we're going to say it's $140,000. Okay, and then on your earnest money, you can go ahead and put in, say, $500, right, or whatever amount. Strategically, you know, if you're putting in an offer, a good way to do it is to go ahead and type in, you know, the most money that your buyer is willing to lose. Okay, so if you're up against a lot of other people or whatever, then you can certainly go ahead and do that. Now, to be applied towards the buyer's closing costs and prepaids. This is a good way to make sure that your buyer's closing costs are covered as well as their prepaids. And why you want to put that in is in prepaids, that covers their insurances and taxes and things like that, okay, so that they are covered when they actually close, okay. Hang on just a second here. Okay, had to fix something there. Then their additional down payment. All right, so the additional down payment, you want to make sure that you put down, you know, whatever that is. If it's 3.5%, 10%, or whatever, put down additional down payment. In this case, it's $14,000. Okay, and then write down additional down payment. Then figure out the amount, the difference between this, and that'll give you the loan amount that you're going to get. Now you can put down to be obtained through FHA financing, conventional financing, or whatever, conventional, cash, or however they're going to purchase it. Okay, then the actual closing date. Now you can double click here, all right, and you can actually type in the date. I recommend that you always close at the last working day of the month, which in this case is April 30th. And the reason why is because that will allow you to go ahead and close with all of their prepaids being the least amount of money possible. If you close on the 15th of the month, then they have 15 days between the 15th and the 30th worth of prepaid interest that they have to pay up front, along with any insurance or anything like that. So the closer you are towards the end of the month, the better off you are, because the less money they have to come up with up front. Now, possession. Obviously it says, you know, here that the seller is going to go ahead and deliver possession of the property on the date of close of escrow, or if you need to have a specific date afterwards, then you would go ahead and click here. Okay. Addenda. If there's any special addenda that's attached to this, like an as-is addendum, or buyer contingency, like they got to sell their house first, or if they have a well, lead-based paint, you know, if there's a septic system, or if it's a short sale or any other kind of like a bank addenda or whatever, this is where you would click it and you would write it in. Okay. The things that go with the house, things like the oven, the ceiling fans, door screens, door openers, storage sheds, light fixtures, pretty much anything that's attached to the property goes with the property. If it's screwed in, nailed on, or hammered in somehow, then it stays. And the way I always want to tell the buyer is that you want to make sure that if there's something in specific you want, you need to tell me now. Now, additional personal property, okay, would be things like the refrigerator, the washer, and the dryer. Okay, or like the chandelier, let's say, chandelier in living room. Okay? Now, you always want to minimize whatever you write in all these sections of the contract. You want to minimize that, because what will happen is that will allow lawyers to go ahead and be able to jack up your contract. If you write in there something funny, as seen in MLS number 210101503, dated such and such, right? That's not really a very objective way to look at the contract. You want to say something very, very objective, like the living room has a blue couch that transfers with the property, or it has a sub-zero freezer in the garage that conveys, or something along those lines. Be very, very specific, okay? Colors, serial numbers, things like that if you want it. Fixtures and leased items that are not included, things like a satellite dish, or maybe some furniture that they've leased from Rent-A-Center or something along those lines. Okay. Now, going into financing. Now here you've got to tell the seller a little bit about how you plan on buying this thing. Okay. So the completed AAR pre-qualification form is or is not attached. All right. In this particular circumstance, it's always a good idea in this market to make sure you have a pre-qualification form from your lender, signed by your buyer. Make sure it's signed, and you can attach that. For the loan contingency, the whole thing is contingent upon the buyer being able to qualify for the loan no later than 3 days prior to the close of escrow date. Okay, so if it's getting to be day, the 30th, and they haven't found financing by, say, the 29th, okay, then they may not be able to use this loan contingency to get out of the deal. All right, so make sure that their loan contingency has all been resolved by the 27th. Unfulfilled loan contingency. If for some reason they can't get their loans, and it's 3 days prior to the close of escrow date, 3 days. It's calendar days, not business days. 3 calendar days. If they can't get a loan by the 27th, then they're able to go ahead and cancel this deal and get their earnest money. Okay? And the thing is that the buyer acknowledges that prepaid items separately from the earnest money are not refundable. Those are items like termite inspections, any kind of inspections that they've paid outside escrow, things like home inspections, so on and so forth. You can't get your money back. Okay? Interest rate, necessary funds. The buyer is letting the seller know that, look, the inability to obtain loan approval because they failed to lock the interest rate and points, okay, during the inspection period is not the ability to get out of the loan. So in other words, you can't go back and say, well, we didn't lock our loan in at the right interest rate, and now the interest rates have gone up 2%, and gosh, now we can't afford the home and we don't qualify. Well, that's just tough because you didn't lock your loan during your inspection period. You have to be sure that they lock their interest rate in. Okay? Loan status update. The buyer will go ahead and deliver to the seller a loan status update, okay, letting them know their current loan status when the when the seller asks for it. So the seller has the ability to go to the lender and say, hey, look, I want to know where my buyer's at. Give me, some updated loan status updates here so I know what's going on. Now, the lender cannot refuse this. This is an instruction from the buyer to the lender saying that they will go ahead and provide any information as requested. The broker and the seller can use this information, use this escrow, use this contract as written proof that the buyer has agreed to that. So if the buyer is needing to prove documents or prove something, the seller can ask for it. Okay? Loan application. Unless they've already done it, all right, the buyer will go ahead and complete, sign, and deliver the tri-merge credit report and complete the 1003. That is basically the application for the loan. Now, they are also saying that they will go ahead and start all the initial requested documentation, which are things like W-2s, 1099s, any kind of tax records that they may need to go ahead and supply. Loan processing. All right, well, the buyer agrees to work diligently, obviously, to go ahead and do what they're supposed to do, and the buyer shall sign all loan documents no later than 3 days prior to the close of escrow. So it's important that you tell your buyer right off the bat, hey, look, the close of escrow date is the 30th, but I'm going to have you sign paperwork, okay, the 27th or before. And the reason why is because if there's any problems, I have time to go back and fix it, all right? Type of financing. Here you want to outline exactly what it is that you're wanting the buyer to do, all right? So in this case, we're going to say that they're getting an FHA loan or a VA, USDA loan, assumption, Kellerback, whatever it is, and that any other kind of loan costs, all the costs obtaining the loan shall be paid for by the buyer unless otherwise described for herein, meaning below, all right? So, in addition to the other costs the sellers agreed to pay, i.e. closing costs, the seller agrees to pay up to blank % of the purchase price or blank dollars for the loan costs, including prepaids, impounds, buyer title insurance, blah, 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 right? Oftentimes, on an FHA loan, you may request a certain amount of money to be put down towards the buyer closing costs. On FHA, the current regulation says you can't have more than 3.5% towards the buyer closing costs. Now, or at least it may be more, but that's my knowledge of it. I could be wrong. So in this case, you're going to say, well, look, I'm going to ask for the seller to pay 3% towards my closing costs. Now, a note for strategy. If you decide to go ahead and offer a full purchase price on a property in the current market environment, it is entirely appropriate for you to ask for closing costs. That's people expect that. It's common. If, on the other hand, you're going to ask for less than the asking price, you want to be very judicious about what you ask for. So in other words, if they're asking $100,000 and you come in and you're offering them $90,000 and you're asking for 3% towards their closing costs, the net seller's sales price is $83,000. That is not a $90,000 deal. That's an $83,000 deal. And I'm sorry, 80. Well, let's see, 90. It's 2,700. So that's what, 87.3, I think it is. Yeah. So 87.3. So make sure you're careful about what you're offering because that can affect your value otherwise. Now, escrow fees, VA loan costs. Now, there are certain fees that the VA used to say that the buyer cannot pay and that the seller needs to pay that. You need to go ahead and work with your lender to find out what those costs are, if any. Changes. Basically, the buyer will let the seller know of any changes in their loan program, okay, within 5 days of contract acceptance, and will only make such changes, with the written consent of the seller, unless it doesn't affect the ability of the buyer's ability to get the loan. So in other words, all right, if they decide to change their loan program from one place to another, or whatever, if it does not affect the seller adversely, then they can do it without the seller's approval. If, on the other hand, it's going to delay the closing or affect their ability to close or something like that, then they can't make any changes to their loan program without approval from the seller. Okay? So, the next contingency that we have on here is called the appraisal contingency. The appraisal contingency is basically saying that the property is only going to be for the amount that it actually appraises for. So in other words, if in this case we're offering $140,000, the buyer is only on the hook for $140,000. If it appraises to $150,000, hey, great, you've done a great deal for your buyer. They got a terrific house at a great price. If, on the other hand, it only appraises to $130,000, then the buyer is not obligated to purchase the property. They do not have to purchase it, and they have 5 days to cancel the contract and receive a refund of their earnest money or waive the contingency. Okay? Appraisal fees. Now, when they require, and they almost always do, you've got to figure out who's going to pay for the appraisal. Now, if, on the other hand, you've told the seller, hey, look, I want to ask you to pay 3.5% towards my closing costs, then you're deciding that you're going to pay for your own appraisal. You can say, we'll pay for our own appraisal. Or if you want the seller to pay for it, which is, very rare, but let's assume that they do, then that's one thing or the other. But in this case, we're saying that it's buyer or seller, or in some markets, it could be half. Half by the buyer, half by the seller, or paid for by the buyer and reimbursed by the seller. Could be anything. But you also say appraisal fee is or is not included in the seller's concessions. So you're saying, in this case, that the seller, let's say, agrees to pay for the appraisal, and it is included in the seller concessions, meaning that the buyer is going to most likely end up writing the check for it to be done and be reimbursed at closing out of those closing costs. Okay? Now, next, title and escrow. Okay, so with title, you want to pick a company. I like to pick a company and stick with it, because find a company that you're good with, that you deal business with all the time, and what you'll find is that they will bend over backwards for you. And in this particular circumstance, because I've used them so much, I used First American Title with Melanie Hestekin. She's a great officer, by the way, so I would recommend that you use her. And then, of course, the address, the city, state, zip code, email address if you have it, the phone, fax, right? Title investing. Now, title investing is something you do not want to get involved in. You do not want to tell the buyer how they should take title. There are a lot of ways to take title, and you know them. You got, rights of survivorship. You got joint tenancy. You've got tenants in common. You've got, you've got LLCs. I mean, a whole bunch of different ways you can vest the title in. But in this particular circumstance, it does have significant legal, estate planning, and tax consequences, and they need to go ahead and talk with their CPA about this, or a lawyer, but not you. All right? Title commitment and title insurance. Now, this is the instructions to the title company saying, hey, look, the title insurance and the title commitment, okay, they need to go ahead and provide title insurance, and they need to go ahead and give this to you in the form of a Schedule B in title insurance, title report, so on and so forth. They're going to provide what's called an ALTA policy, which is American Land Title Association policy. It's a standard common thing now. And they will, if they do not have that expanded coverage from an ALTA policy, then they have what's called a standard owner title policy. Now, the difference between that is really something you want to check with your title officer on. They'll explain the differences between an ALTA policy and a standard owner's title policy. The standard of practice today is for an ALTA policy to be issued out. That gives expanded coverage in a lot more circumstances than perhaps a standard owner's title might. Okay. They were also, charged with giving the covenants, codes, and restrictions, deed restrictions, easements, things like that. Okay, to the buyer. The buyer will have 5 days after receipt of this title commitment, and after receipt of that notice, any exceptions, to provide notice to the seller of any items they disapprove. So in other words, once they get that Schedule B, once they get that title report, they can review it, and they have 5 days to make a decision. If they see something funky on there that they don't like, they can get out of this contract and get their earnest money back. This is yet another way that your buyer can get out. Okay? Additional instructions. Now, they need to go ahead, this is a note to the title company saying they need to go ahead and let the homeowners association know that somebody is buying the property. They need to go ahead and make sure that all the title, all the homeowners association dues are paid, all the documents are created, and that they will go ahead and modify the documents that it's consistent with the contract, meaning that they will go ahead and change the HUD and so on and so forth, so that everybody knows where the money is going. Okay? Tax prorations. Taxes are taxed payable to the seller are prorated on the close of escrow based on the latest tax information available by the Pima County assessors. Release of the earnest money. If there's a problem between the buyer and the seller on the earnest money, the escrow company will hold the money unless it is very clear in the contract where it goes. And you're saying that you agree to hold harmless indemnify escrow against any claim for holding it. Okay? Prorations. Everything is prorated to the date of close of escrow that are not a lien. Okay? So, homeowners association fees, rents, irrigation fees, insurance premiums, interest on encumbrances, anything like that shall be prorated to the close of escrow. Or you could say, click here, you could say something like, the end of the month. You could say it's all credited to the seller, to the buyer, however you want to do that. But primarily, close of escrow is the common thing. Assessment liens. Now, if there's any other assessments against the property, okay, what that can be, it could be something like street lights are a great example. if there is a property where it is new and they have an assessment, it's an older subdivision, they decided to put street lights in, the city came in and put in street lights, then the city assesses this neighborhood the value of the cost of putting in the street lights on a prorated basis. Now, once you find out about that, that shall be either A, paid in full by the seller, or B, prorated and assumed by the buyer. A lot of cases, you just want to go ahead and say paid in full by the seller. If you're representing the buyer, try and get the seller to pay for everything. That's the best way to go about it. IRS and FERPA reporting. Okay, so basically what it is if the seller is a foreign person or a non-resident alien, okay, then there are certain laws that they have to uphold. The title company has to go ahead and hold up to 10% of the purchase price for taxes unless they're exempt. So what this was primarily designed for was for people who bought property generally in the 80s and the 90s and decided to go ahead and keep it. Back then, a lot of times Japan was buying property and so on and so forth. Primarily, you don't really come across that too much anymore, but occasionally if you have a foreign person or non-resident alien who owns property in Arizona, then they can be subject to this Foreign Investment Real Property Tax Act of 10%. Okay, pretty rare, but it does happen. Okay, so here we are into the disclosure portion. Now, the seller is agreeing to go ahead and provide this seller property disclosure statement within 5 days of contract acceptance. And after that period, okay, they have 5 days of receipt of that SPUDS, SPDS, to go ahead and cancel the contract. Yet again, another way to get out of this contract. This is rife with ways for a buyer to get out of the contract. So there's really no reason why a buyer needs to be scared. There's 5 ways from Sunday to get out of this contract, and this is one of them. So if the buyer gets the SPUDS within 5 days of contract acceptance, then they can go ahead and cancel within 5 days after that. Now, let's say that you get the SPUDS back from the seller on day 1. You have 5 days without ever performing an inspection to go ahead and cancel this contract on this item alone. If, on the other hand, day 5 comes and you still have that SPUDS from the from the seller, you can cancel the contract and get your money back. Insurance claims. The seller has to deliver to the buyer a written 5-year insurance claims. This is otherwise known as a CLUE report, and that stands for Comprehensive Loss Underwriting Exchange. Basically what that is a database for insurance agents outlining exactly what claims there have been against the property. Now, they have, for the last 5 years, insurance company, okay? And if it's unavailable from this CLUE report, then the seller has to go ahead and provide at least a letter from their insurance company. Okay, if it's a REO property or something like that, then you're not going to get it, but at least that's what that's for. Okay. If, on the other hand, they receive this receipt from the claims history, they have 5 days to get out of that too. So if they receive something from the CLUE report and they say, oh, wait a minute, there was a moldy roof that got taken care of, they can cancel that up to 5 days. Lead-based paint. All right, so if it was built prior to 1978, then there's a couple things that they have a right to. A, they have the information provided through the multiple listing service about the the seller's knowledge of any lead-based paint, and that the seller can provide their information within 5 days after the acceptance. Now, what you want to check here is you want to say if it's built after 1978, okay, then you want to go ahead and initial down here, saying it was constructed after 1978 and this no longer applies. If it was built prior to 1978 and you have the ability to go ahead and get a copy of that, it's a great thing to say here that it was provided and you do have the right to go ahead and check for lead-based paint. Okay? If it was not for whatever reason on the MLS or you had something incomplete, then the seller will provide that stuff within 5 days, and that the buyer has 10 days to inspect it. Or you can say 20 days, 30 days, 100 days, whatever it is, after receipt of that information to go ahead and do lead-based paint testing. Okay? And then once they receive that information, or 5 days from that, they can go ahead and cancel it. So again, another way to get out of this deal. All right? Affidavit of disclosure. Now, if this property is located in an unincorporated area of the county, all right, and 5 or few parcels of this property other than subdivided property are being transferred, then the seller has to give you what's called an affidavit of disclosure within 5 days of the contract acceptance. And the buyer has to go ahead and show that they have it and then go ahead and sign it, okay, within 5 days after it, all right? Now, in plain English, what this means, basically, this is to prevent wildcat subdividing, all right? So what this is simply saying is that if they are getting 5 or fewer parcels, okay, that's not subdivided, and they're buying 2 or 3 parcels at once, then the seller has to deliver to them any knowledge they have about the property, subdividing egress, ingress, legality of any of that, where the different emergency routes are, things like that. Okay. Changes during escrow. Now, nobody can change anything during escrow, all right, without. I'm sorry, I'm stepping a little bit ahead of this. If the seller discovers that there is something wrong, okay, they're doing their spuds, they found out, everything was fine, and then a couple days after the fact, they notice, hey, wait a minute, we had a leaky pipe in the sink, and we had to fix that. Well, the seller has to immediately let the buyer know of any changes on that spuds, okay, and they have to let them know that up front, all right, and the buyer is allowed up to 5 days after they get that, again, to cancel. So in this scenario, let's pretend that they discover that they have a sink that leaks, and they discover that it's been leaking for some time, and now there's mold. They have 5 days after that to get out, if that's what they want to do. Okay. Now the warranties. Now the seller is basically saying, hey, look, I'm going to keep this house in good shape. It's going to be in perfect condition. I'm going to keep it all the way you saw it the day you saw it. It's all going to be in the same condition. I'm not going to tear the house apart. Okay. The warranties that survive this is that we're going to let you know of any material latent defects, all right, and anything that we think that might materially and adversely affect your consideration to pay. So in other words, if they find out after the fact, hey, wait a minute, we've got a lien on the property for $100,000, it's a tax lien, and we just found out about it, well, they got to tell you about it, okay? Or if you ask for them to fix something, and or even prior to this, let's say that they had let's say they had a roof work done, right? And they decided not to pay the person. And the person is coming after the fact and going to put on a mechanic's lien, let's say, all right? What they're agreeing to, the seller is agreeing that for the full 150 days immediately preceding the close of escrow, okay, if they've done any work, that they will go ahead and make sure it's paid and that it is correct, okay? That's the timeline for that, 150 days. The buyer warranties. Okay, so the buyer is saying, okay, cool, I'll go ahead and I'll make some promises to you. I'll let you know that if anything happens to my ability to close this contract, I will let you know immediately, okay? And that I'm going to conduct my inspections, okay? And that I'm accepting it as this particular circumstance. And the buyer is saying that they're not relying on any verbal representations except as disclosed as follows. So in other words, in this case, did you make them any promises? Did you say, hey, this is on a live gold mine, right? That's what they're going off of, right? And that's why they're buying $140,000 for a $10 property, right? That's where you'd want to put down any promises that you said it was. If you're a smart agent, you're going to put down none. Do not, under any circumstances, leave this blank. That's bad news if you do, okay? Due diligence. All right, now this is your buyer's chance. Their chance to go ahead and check it out for anything and everything that is interesting to them, okay? The default period is for 10 days or blank days. So if they're out of state or they're gone or whatever, you're going to need more time, then go ahead and put in more time, 15 days, 20 days, whatever it is. Sometimes it's a good idea strategically to go ahead and say less time. So an example of that would be like an REO property, okay? Where everybody else is offering the same amount of price, the same amount of property, the same amount of earnest money, and everything's the same. If your inspection period instead of 10 days is now 5 days or 3 days or 2 days, that could be an advantage to you, okay? Because it looks different to the seller and they will make their decision from there, okay? So you can use that to help differentiate your offer. But basically, the buyer will go ahead and do all the inspections they need to do and check it for everything and anything that is concerned to them. This is their one and only opportunity, okay? Now, they need to go ahead and check it for natural death, suicide, sex offenders, potential hazards of any kind, building, zoning, fire, health, safety code, anything. They need to check it out. And then they agree to go ahead and provide the seller and the broker, upon receipt at no cost, copies of any and all inspection reports, okay? So check it out. If you're the selling agent, okay, you have an obligation to disclose to the buyer, to the selling agent or the listing agent exactly what you found, okay? Keep it, be honest about it, help them out, give them a copy of what you found, okay? That'll help you out in the long run. If you are the listing agent, you have a right to ask for that stuff and you have a right to the copy of it. If they say, well, we can't get a copy of it because it's property of the home inspector. Home inspectors a lot of times will try and say, well, it's our own intellectual property and it's only for the use of the buyer. No. You've already signed away your rights here, so you owe us a copy of that. So you have the right to ask for it, okay? It's good for your seller. Get it. Square footage. And the buyer is aware that whenever we're talking about square footage, okay, it's approximate. And if it's something that's really, really important to them, then they need to go out there with a measuring tape and measure it during the inspection period, okay? All of these things are happening during the inspection period. Termite inspections. Okay, if you're going to get a loan, then you're definitely going to get a termite inspection. Try and get that done at the same time as the home inspection. The flood hazard. All right, so in this case, basically saying that they're going to check for flood hazard, see if it's in a flood zone. Okay, you can get the flood maps from FEMA. Insurance. They need to go ahead and apply and get written confirmation of the availability and cost of homeowners insurance. Okay, you can't go back after the fact and say, gee whiz, we didn't know, we can't get home inspection or home insurance. That's why we need to cancel the deal. No, you had 10 days to do this. So you need to go through your home inspection and do that. Now, if it's on a sewer, septic system, or an alternative system of some sort, this is where you disclose that. Most cases, you're going to click sewer system. Now, if its sewer connection is a material matter to the buyer, it must be investigated. Now, how you do that? Okay, well, that's called a dye test. D-Y-E, dye test. What they do is they take a package of methylene blue or something methylene green, something along those lines, and flush it down the toilet and find out where the water turns green or the water turns blue outside. If you find that in the yard you find blue grass growing, then you have a problem. Okay, that is a dye test. And if it's served by a septic or alternative system, then you have to include the septic system and the buyer needs to initial here. Okay, now, next. Swimming pool regulations. Well, we do have rules about having swimming pools. Kids and water don't always mix well, and the buyer needs to understand that there are rules about these things. So make sure that they initial there. Okay? Make sure they initial right there. Buyer acknowledges and recognizes and agrees and everything that you are not a qualified home inspector. You are not anything like that. You don't know anything about anything except selling. If you have a buyer, and let me stress this again, if you have a buyer who says that they do not want a home inspection, that they waive a home inspection, then you are in huge trouble. You've got to find a way to get that person to sign 5 million pieces of paper saying that you told them to get a home inspection and that they refused. That, it is against your better judgment that they should do it and that they refuse. You've got to have it in writing, okay? Anybody who says they do not want a home inspection, you need to have that written down very, very, very clearly, that you've explained to them the consequences of not getting it done, that it's not worth saving $300. Stop being cheap. Get out there off your ass and do a home inspection, okay? Now that you've made that clear, have them initial there, okay? Now, inspection period. Once that 10-day period is up, okay, they have all their inspections done. Everything's done, okay? And that all inspection period items disapproved of shall be provided in a single notice. Single notice. What that basically means is this, that is your BINSR, your buyer inspection and notice sales report, right? Seller's receipt. What you're basically saying to them in one single notice, that you have all of these particular items that you found and that you have a problem. Now, the buyer, at their own sole discretion, disapproves of items the buyer shall deliver to the seller notice of these items disapproved and state that the notice elects to do either A, immediately cancel the contract and get their money back right then and there. That has to be done prior to the 10th day, okay, or whatever day your inspection period ends. Or B, provide the seller an opportunity to correct the items, okay. If they go back to the seller and say, you know what, this is a great house, I love it, for $140,000, man, what a bargain. But every time I touch the light switch, it shocks me. Then they write it down, please fix, repair or replace this, okay. The seller now has 5 days to, or how many ever days, to go ahead and give them their response. They can choose to do it, okay, or not to do it. If the seller agrees to correct that, okay, then they will go ahead and provide to you receipts within 3 days prior to the close of escrow that actually everything was done. Now the question is, why 3 days? So, what happens? Why 3 days? Why do we say 3 days? Well, you may remember from before that the 3 days period is the day that the loan documents are due there, and that's the day that your people need to sign. Yay! So you want to make sure that you're not waiting to the very last possible minute. Now remember, this is all theoretic. And the reality of it is that you'll be hopping around 2 days after the escrow period and you've already extended it 3 times and all that. But in an ideal world, all that stuff would have been done 3 days prior. Now, if the seller says, nope, screw you, I'm selling it to you at a great price, I am not going to fix that, then the buyer may cancel the contract within 5 days after getting that seller's notice, okay, or the expiration for that 5-day notice, and all the earnest money will be released to the buyer. Now, this is important. These next 2 stages I want you to understand. Agents lose money here, all right? If the buyer does not cancel this contract within 5 days as provided, okay, then the buyer shall close escrow without correction of those items that the seller has not agreed to correct. So in other words, 10th day comes, you write out your buyer inspection notice repair, and you say, I want that light switch fixed, repaired, or replaced. And you don't hear anything for 5 solid days, and you don't do anything about it. Well, guess what? You just bought the house with that broken light switch, okay? Tough noogies, you can't go back and ask for it to be fixed. Now, verbal discussions will not extend the time period. Only a written agreement signed by both parties will extend response times or cancellation rights. So in other words, if you find yourself on a Friday at 5 o'clock prior to your inspection period over, if your inspection period is over on Sunday night and it is Friday, okay, verbal discussions will not extend that, okay? Email will not extend that. Nothing will cancel it. Nothing will cancel it unless a written agreement signed by both parties will extend that or cancel that. The agents can't make that decision. The buyer can't, unilaterally make that decision. It has to be done right then. If you're going to extend it, it has to be signed by both. If you're going to cancel it, the buyer can do it alone, but they have to put it in writing in their own hand, okay? Buyer's failure to give notice of disapproval or items on the cancellation of this contract within the specified time period shall conclusively be deemed buyer's election to proceed within the transaction without correction of any of the disapproved items. Plain English, look, if you don't write it down by the end of that 10th day with your buyer's signature on it, guess what? Your time period is over. End of conversation. There's no 2 ways about it. It's written in bold. It's big. You can't miss it. You have to make sure your buyer understands that. You are the one in charge. Make sure the buyer understands. Again, and look, the reason why I'm being so verbal about this is because you can lose your earnest money very, very easily here if you screw this up. Your client will tell you, oh, that's okay, don't worry about it, it's no big deal. No, it is a big deal. If you don't do this, we don't do it by the rules, by the way we said we're going to do it, then you will lose your earnest money. And that's the end of that. It's not your money, it's their money. If they lose their earnest money because you failed to tell them that, it's your fault. And you need to write the check. If, on the other hand, you told them to do that, they failed to do it like you instructed to do that, then you make sure you make a note of it, write it down, log it in, however you want to do it, record it in some fashion stating that you told them to write it down and they failed to do so. That way when they lose their earnest money, they can't come back to you and say, "Oh, I didn't know." Now, that being said, let's move on. Notice of non-working warranted items. Okay, so in this particular circumstance, what is a non-working warranted item? A warranted item is an air conditioner, is an oven, something that is required to live in the home. So for example, you've got an oven that has 4 burners and 1 burner doesn't work. It is a non-working warranted item. That is an item that is warranted. Same thing goes with the air conditioner, okay? The buyer has to provide the seller with notice of any of these items that are warranted. Again, oven, stove, microwave that's built in, air conditioner, heater, something like that. They have to let them know, okay, that they found out about during the inspection period that it doesn't work, okay? If they didn't let them know about it, then they've waived the right for that thing to be working, all right? Delivery of such notice shall not affect the obligation to maintain or repair it. Now, basically what this means is that the seller is going to let them know if they find out something that's working, all right, or not working. If the air conditioner isn't working, you got to let them know about it. They have no obligation. The seller has no right. The seller has to fix it because it has to be there. The oven, stove has to work. And you let them know, hey, guess what? I found out that that 3rd burner on the left doesn't work. They have no choices. They have to fix it, okay? This is not a debatable item here. You have to fix that, okay? If you, on the other hand, fail to let them know that, hey, it doesn't matter. They don't have to do it anymore, okay? So now during your as-is addendums get rid of this entire section, 6K. That gets rid of that. So whenever you're filling out an as-is addendum, the as-is addendum is nothing more than explaining that the buyer has the right to inspect the property. The seller has to give them a right to inspect it, but they are waiving their right to this, and they're waiving their right to ask for anything to be repaired. That's really what the as-is addendum is all about, the current as-is addendum. Home warranty. Okay, so if your client wants a home warranty, now's the time to speak up. We use 210. 210 is a great company. We recommend that you use it. Home warranty shall be ordered by the buyer, okay, with the following coverage. If they've got a pool or something like that, you write that in here, to be issued out by 210 warranty, right? At a cost not to exceed, let's say $395 or whatever it costs, and to be paid for by the seller or the buyer or whoever, okay? Or if they decided to decline to purchase that, make sure you fill in something here, okay? Walkthrough. All right, so the seller is saying, okay, cool. Now that we've gone through the inspections, now that we did the repairs, now that everything's straight, you got the right to go ahead and check out and make sure that the work is done. They have reasonable access to conduct the walkthrough. You want to do that at least the day before you sign things, okay? Or at the very minimum, the day of, okay? You want to make sure that the stuff is done. This is not an opportunity to ask or look for more problems. This is only your opportunity to make sure that the items that you requested are repaired in the first place. That's your only reason for this, okay? The seller's responsibility. Well, the seller's got to make sure that they, keep the doors open and this and that, and keep all the utilities on so they can go ahead and flip on the lights and make sure they don't get shocked, turn on the water, make sure the sink doesn't leak, right? Remedies. Now, cure period. Now, this is a new thing on our contract. It's new in regards to the last year, let's say. But it used to be where you didn't have this, and this basically says that if somebody's not living up to their end of the deal, you can't just cancel the contract and walk away. So for example, let's pretend that you're supposed to close on the 30th, and the 30th comes and the buyer is not closing. The seller has the right to go ahead and issue out what's called a cure notice. And the cure notice says, look, you got 3 days to go ahead and close, get this thing done, right? If they don't, then there's a problem, okay? Then at the end of that 3 days, there's a breach of contract. If they've not gone ahead and signed, then you have a breach. What's up? What's up? Is this important? I'm making a recording. If there's a breach, okay, then they have the right to go ahead and write it up to the title company, okay? And here it's important that you understand that the non-breaching party may cancel the contract or proceed against the breaching party. In this case, the buyer who didn't sign, the seller can come back to the buyer and say, hey, you got 3 days to make it right. And the buyer says, nope, that's okay, and they don't sign. Well, now you have a breach. Now the seller goes ahead, signs something, sends it to the title company, saying, hey, this person did not sign, they didn't close. If it's in the case of the seller, because it's hard to figure out what the actual damages are, then the earnest money may be deemed a reasonable estimate of the damages, and the seller may, at the seller's option, accept the earnest money as their sole right to damages. Okay? Now, what's the exception here? The exception is if, for example, an unfulfilled contingency is not a breach of contract. So if they didn't get their loan, then they get their money back. Okay, so 3 days come, you find out prior to the close of escrow that they can't qualify. Hey, guess what? They get their money back. Okay? Now, the parties expressly agree that the failure of any party to comply with the terms and conditions and allow it to close on this. If it's not cured after cure notice is delivered, then it will constitute a material breach, rendering the contract subject to cancellation. That's when you cancel. You can only cancel once you've given this out. Okay? ADR, Alternative Dispute Resolution, otherwise known as arbitration. Okay? If for some reason, the damages exceed $2,500, then everybody agrees to go to court. Okay? I'm sorry, instead of going to court, they agree to go to resolution. It's binding resolution. Okay? And then it's just the typical AAA arbitration rules. Okay? They get an arbitrator, it's assigned, it's final and non-appealable. The judgment is the judgment. Okay? And that's that. Exclusions for binding resolutions basically is stuff for up to $2,500. So the seller comes along, the buyer says, hey, I love the house, but could you fix that roof? And the seller says, okay, cool, no problem. I'll go ahead and I'll put on $700 worth of roof work. And then the buyer walks away and doesn't close for no good reason. They didn't qualify, is not a good one. Let's say that they just changed their mind and they walked away. Well, the seller could then take them to small claims court, up to $2,500, and ask for the court to go ahead and provide relief. If they do go to court and they get a judgment or they go to an attorney, then any person who loses pays. Okay, my favorite section, lawyer land, additional terms and conditions. Lawyer land. Now, it's very important that you understand anything you write here, okay, is subject to the court, is subject to attorneys. I used to be married to an attorney. I know how they think. I know what they look at, and I'm telling you right from the beginning that this is the first place that they look. On any contract that you write, okay, all of the other boilerplate language you see on the contract is language that was written by an attorney, all right? And it was reviewed by a group of attorneys, and it's very, very safe. Now, here you come with your 90 hours worth of education, and you decide to go ahead and write in the additional terms and conditions stuff that's misspelled, stuff that's not clear, stuff that's vague, stuff that's ambiguous. You're going to get in trouble. So don't write in there something like this. Don't write in, okay, something like Spot's doghouse will be removed from the backyard for close of escrow, right? That's going to look like you're an idiot, okay? So do not write stuff like that, okay? If you want to remove Spot's doghouse, make sure you put in there something a little bit more coherent, something to the effect of the seller agrees to remove the doghouse from the backyard prior to the close of escrow. All other terms and conditions apply. Boom. Very simple, very clean. Yes? Good. All right. If you have questions about that, ask your broker. Next, risk of loss. Okay, well, if the house burns down prior to the property closing, it is still the seller's home. And, okay, that the risk of loss shall be on the seller. Okay, but if the cost of repairing it is more than 10% of the purchase price, the seller or the buyer can cancel the contract. So if it burns down and it's going to take $13,000 to go ahead and repair it, in this particular circumstance, that does not exceed 10%. The buyer's not out of it. Not yet. Okay? He may elect to cancel the contract later on in another provision, but at the moment, this is still a seller's house. Permission. Likewise, going back to this, the seller has to repair it, incidentally. So it's $13,000 worth of damage. The seller has to pay for it to get it fixed. Permission. The buyer and seller agrees to go ahead and advise the public of the contract, i.e. a sold sign. Yay! Arizona contract is not governed under Tahitian law, and that time is of the essence, meaning that everybody agrees to go ahead and jump on things and not just sit there and act at the last minute. Compensation. If you're going to be paid for services by anybody, i.e., Title Security, Melanie Hestekin at First American Titles agreed to go ahead and pay you $100 for every time you bring an escrow by, you have to let people know. Or 210 Warranties agreed to pay you money because every time you write up a contract, you write them on it, they give you money. You got to let them know. All right, the seller has a right, and so does the buyer have a right to know. In this case, you're just simply saying that the only way you're getting paid is through the listing agreement, and that the Arizona Association of Realtors is really kind and says, hey, by the way, in case nobody noticed, commissions are payable for the sale leasing are not set by any standard, so you can negotiate the crap out of your agent and let them go home hungry. Yeah, thanks. Appreciate that. Copies and counterparts. Okay, so if you get an executed contract, all right, then they have a copy of it or a fax copy of it or something along those lines, then that is totally fine, okay? That is completely legitimate, all right? Now, here's the thing. The lead-based paint disclosure statement cannot be signed in counterpart. It has to be signed one instrument, okay? That each person needs to be signed together, and it's an original, okay? All references to the days in this contract, all right, shall be marked as calendar days, not business days. They begin at 12 a.m. and end at 11:59 p.m. Calculating time periods. Basically what we're saying here is that the day that something begins is not included, and that the day that the last time period is included. So in plain English, if you go ahead and, let's say, acts that must be performed 3 days prior to the close of escrow date, the date must be performed 3 full days prior. So for example, if the closing date is Friday, then the act must be performed by 11:59 p.m. on Monday. So that gives you Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Yay! Confused? I am. The entire agreement. This is the entire agreement, nothing up my sleeve, with the exception of the attachments that we already put in the very beginning, that the seller has the right to take multiple offers, okay? That is a backup offer, all right? Cancellation. If you decide to go ahead and cancel this, again, you have to cancel this contract by delivering notice stating the reason for the cancellation, or to the other party, or to the escrow company, okay? Cancellation shall become effective immediately upon delivery of the cancellation notice. It has to be written, and it has to be in writing, and it has to be written and signed by the buyer, okay? Notice. Now, if they go ahead and give you something, you're the buyer's agent, or the seller's agent, and you send over to them hand-delivered notice, the contract, or you send it via fax, okay? Or you send it via email, if the email addresses are provided, or sent by recognized overnight courier service and addressed to the buyer, okay, then that's the delivery, that's the notice. Now, I want you to notice about email. If you put the email address in your contracts, then that is a legal format for them to send you email. If you did not get the cancellation notice, and they said, well, we sent it to your email address, and it got bounced back to them or something, or it went in your spam folder or something like that, well, tough noogies, because you wrote it down that email was an acceptable format. So you might want to think twice about that sometimes. Earnest money is in the form of a personal check, which you go ahead and hold. It's not other. You can't say wampum or cars, although you could theoretically say that your earnest money is a car. That earnest money has been received by the broker, which is you, and it will be deposited with the escrow company. Never, ever, never. Broker trust account, we do not do that, okay? Buyer acknowledges that the failure to pay the required closing funds, tough. That's not good. You'll lose everything. You'll lose your earnest money. So if you don't bring up the money at the last date, tough. Once again, release of the brokers. Everybody understands that the brokers are just putting everybody together, that we're not telling everybody everything they need to know. They need to inspect it. The buyer and the seller need to initial it. Terms of acceptance. Now, the acceptance is valid from, let's say, the 3rd at, say, 5 o'clock, right? Now, keep in mind, you want to make friends in this business and you want to last forever, right? So do yourself a favor. Do not give the other agent 12 hours notice to go ahead and have something signed, okay? Talk to them first and say, hey, look, I want to send over a contract. Is it okay if I give you a contract and maybe we get an answer by, I don't know, would day after tomorrow at 8 in the morning be cool? Oh, yeah, that's cool. You know, my people are here in town. But look, if you go ahead and you send them a contract Friday at 4:55 in the afternoon and expect an answer by Saturday at noon and you don't call them, well, you're not going to make too many friends. Okay, we're filing it up here. This contract contains 9 pages, right? You put in your name, agent code, firm name, firm code, all your particulars there, who you represent, the buyer, the agent, the buyer, or the seller, or both the buyer and the seller. Joe Blow gets to sign right here, put in his address right there, so that he can go ahead and receive his title insurance and his stuff at that address. That's what the title company goes by. If you want to make it look really spiffy, go ahead and type in the person's, the other person's name, their agent code, right? And make it like that. That makes it look really spiffy. They like that a lot. Sally Smith's name's already defaulted in there. If you already know Sally Smith's address, put that in there. Okay. And then you got yourself a contract. Now, how you do it? Well, from here you just simply go ahead and print that rascal out. Like so. Print the current form. And it'll go ahead and say, where do you want to print it to? And print. Bammo. And that is how you go ahead and complete the residential purchase contract. Welcome to real estate. You are a super successful agent. If you have any questions, contact me or contact your broker. Contact Frank, contact somebody. Let us know. We'll help you out in any way we can. Thanks for listening to this incredibly long video. Have a powerful day.